we want to get through this material, and I hope we can leave a little bit of time at the end so we can take what we learned last night and what we're going to talk about this morning, and I'm going to give you kind of a counseling scenario as quickly as I can, and I want you guys to kind of talk through it, sort of interpret the data and figure out what we need to do, what you should do, what kind of homework you can give someone. So just like many couples don't sit down and say, what are the purposes of marriage and how should I practically pursue that in my life? Most men don't sit down and say, what does God call me to be as a husband? Where does the Bible teach me that? And how do I pursue that practically? So God's got a design for this, right? And we've talked about last night how God's design for our lives and our marriage is for His glory and our blessedness. And so understanding what we're supposed to be pursuing and how to pursue it is really how we pursue God's glory and our joy. So we need to understand these things. So I'm going to go through 3 responsibilities, and they basically follow the pattern that's in Wayne's book. I think he has leader and lover, and then underneath the lover, he talks about 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7, where it says, husbands, dwell with your wives in an understanding way. And he talks about how we need to be learners, I think he says. So I kind of pull that one out because I think it's pretty key and treat it as a separate point. So that's what we're going to talk about, that husbands should understand what it means and how to practically pursue being a lover, a leader, and a learner of their wife. So that's what we're going to look at. First, the husband needs to be a lover. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Verse 28, he says, you should love your wife as your own body. He who loves his wife loves himself. No one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it. And verse 33, let each one of you love his wife as himself. So 4 times it says love your wife, and then it describes what that looks like as Christ loved the church. It involves nourishing and cherishing. So understanding what all those things mean are really important. So again, we talked about a little bit yesterday how we need to define terms with people. A lot of people just don't have accurate understanding of terms, and so even the idea of love, at times people do not understand it. They associate it more with feelings. That's where much of our culture is at. They think of, so these are kind of those bullet points there, that love is a feeling. It's just a feeling that you can fall into or fall out of. And that's just not the way the Bible talks about it, as we will see. Our American culture doesn't think of love in any traditional Christian sense as a strength. They think of it more as a weakness at times. That's going to vary in degree, but they may think of love as being primarily a physical thing, a physical attraction, or relate more to sexual experiences, but that is obviously not what the Bible talks about it. And then there's people that just have fuzzy, feel-good ideas about what love is. You'll just know. You ever heard that? When you're in love, you'll just know. Or I stole this one. Love is the feeling you feel when you feel you're having a feeling you've never felt before. I can't remember where I got that, but is that Randy Patton? Okay, that was a Randy Patton quote. I should footnote these things before I get in trouble. How does the scripture define love? Well, John 3:16, pretty helpful here, right? God so loved the world. God in this way loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. So love results in giving, in meeting other people's needs, in sacrificing for others. And when we think about love, when you talk to people about what love is, they need to understand that it is a sacrificial giving of yourself to another. So it's a choice first. It's not a feeling first. It's a choice first. The feelings come second. If you have the right kinds of affections, certainly making those choices is easier. It's also true that if the person you're trying to love is lovable, it's easier to make those choices, right? But it still stands true that we're to love our enemies. We don't feel a certain way about our enemies, nor are our enemies very lovable, right? And yet we can love them. And being able to love is not a weakness. It's really a true test of masculinity if you really understand what it means to be a man created in the image of God, right? So we want to recreate ourselves in the image of our culture, right? That's not what masculine love looks like. And obviously, the biblical view is that it's a command. 4 times, husbands, love your wives. Just in Ephesians 5, 4 times it says it. So, love is a choice to actively and sacrificially pursue the best interests and needs of another person. Just to put it really simply, actively and sacrificially pursue the best interests and needs of another person. So, and the words best interests are in there very purposefully, because often what is in a person's best interest isn't what they want or what is going to make them feel good, right? So often the best interests of another person involves admonishment or rebuke, right? Or withholding things from them, or protecting them from things. If you've raised teenagers, you know that. There are times when you put boundaries and protections in the lives of your kids because it's good for them. It's for their best interest. They don't understand. They may not even appreciate it. But if they are wise, they will later. So thinking about this active sacrificial choice to pursue the best interests and needs of another person, how does it, what should shape it, right? So let's talk about how the Bible goes and describes these things. And so here's some passages of Scripture that talk about this, and we're talking about husbands in particular here. So first of all, Christ's love, he's our example, right? And the model for a husband's love for his wife. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, right? So Christ loved us first. 1 John 4:19 says we loved him because he first loved us. So I actually tell guys in counseling that if there is a lack of love in your home, the fault starts with you. It starts with you. It's rarely one person's fault, but I say it starts with you, and here's why. Because we love him, because he first loved us. If we want our home to be full of love, then husbands, you love them, whether they love you or not. You just keep loving. So husbands need to initiate that. They need to be actively pursuing that. And they need to be doing it whether they're getting what they want in response or not, right? We're going to love our spouses whether they respond the way we're hoping them to or not, because loving them is a matter of obedience and a matter of honoring God, bringing glory to God. It's not, if your primary motive shouldn't be for your wife to respond a certain way. So that's often the case, and that's when you find out what the real heart issue is, when they come back and say, I tried to love my wife all week, and you know what she did? Right? And they'll tell you some story. And I'll just ask them, well, why were you loving her? Were you doing those loving things because God wanted you to and it was good and right? Or were you doing it so that she would respond another way? Right? So you help them think through that. So, husbands, this starts with you. It starts with you. Ephesians 525, we ought to be loving our wives most. Most. Meaning, if we're to love as Christ loves the church, newsflash, Jesus loves you more than you will ever love him. Anybody willing to disagree with that? So husbands, you need to make every effort to love your wives more than they will ever love you. Now, that's an intimidating statement. I get it, right? But it's still the standard. Love our wives as Christ loved the church. Try to outlove one another. You get a home where husband and wife are trying to outlove one another for the glory of God. Probably going to be a pretty cool home to hang out in, right? So, third, it should be sacrificial. That's also implied in the example of Christ, that our love should be sacrificial. So there's times when we give up our desires, we give up our goals, we give up our plans for her for no other reason than just to be sacrificial. Love focuses on giving, not on getting. So that's an important thing. So you should be thinking that way, guys. How can I give? How can I serve? How can I sacrifice? When was the last time you gave up something for the sake of your wife? Just said, that's not important. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to cancel that hunting trip. For me, it would be cancel that tea time. I thought about it yesterday. I thought about canceling that tea time yesterday because I was out late every night this week. But I ran it by her, and she was like, no, go ahead. The important thing is, though, that we're even thinking about it, because some guys just don't think about it, right? They just do their own thing. So just some challenging questions. What's more complete? Let's see. How many of you guys are readers? You really like to read? I'm kind of a book hound, right? What's more complete, your library or your wife's wardrobe? And you're like, yeah, but my wife's got a shopping idol problem. No. Do you have more toys in the garage than she has in the kitchen? They're not really toys, I get that, right? They're tools. But they're tools for her too. You have your tools to do what you do. She has her tools to do what she does. Her tools don't seem as important to you as they ought to, right? So who has more toys? So it's sacrificial. You're thinking that way. I remember, so I'm pretty stingy by nature. Yeah. Just kind of, I'm a budget hound. Just kind of always been that way. I don't really know why. We don't want to investigate my past, figure that out. So I remember early on in our marriage, we'd get into real tiffs about things. And, of course, I'm only stingy about things that I don't care about, right? So the toys thing, that was an issue for me for a long time. I remember I was actually going through the premarital class while I was in seminary, and the guy said, if you can get something for your wife that she desires, then you should get something. If your wife says she thinks your home needs a new couch, and you can afford to get a new couch, then buy your wife a new couch. What are you being stingy about? And it really just punched me in the gut. I thought, yeah, I just don't think that way. I just don't think that way. I would sit on a 30-year-old couch that it's like, that you can hardly get out of. It's sunken down so much. Because that's me, but that's not my wife. So it helped me a lot just to hear that simple phrase and try to put it into practice. So sacrificial. It needs to be sacrificial. Fourth, our love for our wives needs to be in spite of her faults. Christ loved us while we were yet enemies, right? While we were still ungodly. And we need to love our wives no matter what. When she does things that we don't like, we were unregenerate and rebellious and everything, right? And that is when it's the hardest to love others. Um, but that is how and when Jesus demonstrated his love for us. Romans 5:8, right? Christ demonstrated his love for us, and that while we were yet sinners, he died for us. So we need to demonstrate our love for our wives, even in spite of her faults. So it's important for men, husbands, to think through that. And you need to just keep loving her, even if she doesn't love you back. And when I first went to the church in New England, we did a men's Bible study, and of course, I think I mentioned they were all like, "When are you going to teach our wives about submission?" Not anytime soon, based on what I'm hearing in this class. And they had all been to the Promise Keepers thing numerous times, and they come back and they try to. And so we were talking about sacrificing and loving our wives, and there was about 25 guys in the room, and they sort of like in unison all said, "We tried that. It doesn't work." That's what they said. We went to the Promise Keepers thing, and we came back, and we tried to do everything they told us to do. We tried that, and it doesn't work. Well, when you get these principles, it was really easy for me to go, "Why were you doing it? Why were you doing it?" Right? So we don't do it because it works. We like it when it works, and it's not really that's working, right? So I think you get what I'm saying here. So, will you love her if she never loves you back? There's situations where you got believing husbands who live with unbelieving wives, right? You have to love her. We'll look at that a little bit in Peter in a bit. So, next, our love should be visible, right? Romans 5:8 again. God demonstrates his love. He so loved the world that he gave. Greater love is no man than this, that he laid on his life for his friends. It needs to be visible in the things that we do. So not with word or tongue, but in deed or truth. That's how we're to love each other. All the kind words and all the fine wishes won't replace helping your wife with the dishes. Okay? I've sometimes used the phrase, making love starts in the kitchen. That's not some weird and kinky thing. That's saying get in the kitchen and help your wife. Because if you're not showing affection and practical love and a servant's heart, then you're not wooing her for anything, right? So you sit on the couch and watch Gonzaga while she cleans up the kitchen, and then you think we're going to turn the lights down low and away we go. Well, no, it doesn't work that way. Any wives in here think it works that way? Okay. Loving deeds. It has to be visible, so demonstrated. They need to be able to see it. And then unceasingly, Romans 8:38-39, we should be loving our wives unceasingly. Nothing can separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus, right? Neither life or death or powers to be, things above, things below, nothing can separate us. So his love for us is unceasing. Our love for them needs to be constant and continual. It also needs to be forgiving. Colossians 3. Better get my Bible out. Where Paul says, bearing with one another and forgiving each other, whoever has a complaint against anyone, just as the Lord forgave you, so also should you. Husbands, love your wives and do not be embittered against them. So it needs to be a forgiving, yielding kind of love. It also needs to be a constructive love. So in Ephesians 5, which we saw, right, he says that Christ loved the church, gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so he might present the church to himself in splendor without spot or wrinkle. So our love needs to be a constructive love. That's part of that pursuing their best interests. So it's setting an example and moving toward that. So purifying, sanctifying. And that means leading. That's part of the leadership of your home. is making sure that the love that you display is constructive and leading people to the right places, the conversations that you have, your entertainment choices, all those things play into whether or not the love you show is constructive and not selfish. So then it says, so that's all following that example of Christ, that as Christ loved the church, and so we're just looking at passages where it describes Christ's love for the church. Then Ephesians 5 says also that you should love them as yourself, so as your own body. You know, the implication there is that we already love ourselves, so that's maybe an issue for further discussion, but love others, love your neighbor as yourself doesn't mean you need to focus on loving yourself. The only command there is to love others. The assumption is that we already love ourselves, and we take care of ourselves, and that's the assumption there in Ephesians 5. 2, we nourish and cherish our body. We get up in the morning, and we stink, so we wash it. We're hungry, so we feed it, et cetera, et cetera. That's what we do. We do it naturally. We do it every day. We don't have to work hard at it. And so we need to think that way about our wives. So it should just be our natural inclination. As much as possible, we should be praying that it would be our natural response to our relationship, that we immediately cherish and nourish. So what does that look like? Cherishing is literally it means to warmer, to keep warm. In 1 Thessalonians 2:7, it's the same word that's used for a nursing mother caring for her baby. So there is tenderness and care in cherishing. The nourishing is used in Ephesians 6:4 when it says, bring your children up, bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, bring them up. Word is a nourishing. So you're providing what they need to grow and to flourish, really. And so that's the idea, is caring tenderly and providing what they need to flourish, is cherishing and nourishing. So that's what we do with our own bodies. That's what we need to be doing with our wives. And so, again, in a counseling situation, you're explaining these concepts to guys, and you're listening to them, and you're listening to stories about their life and their marriage relationship. And if you think there are areas where they don't nourish and cherish, then you're thinking, what are some practical things I could tell this guy to do that would express that kind of love? And we'll talk about that at the end. So, some practical stuff. Tell her that you love her. I mean, just, ask. Does he ever tell you that he loves me? Well, I told her on our wedding day. If anything changes, I'll let her know. Right? So, okay, that's really funny. But some guys say it, they almost mean it. And you're like, yeah, that's just not good. Not good. So make sure that they understand the importance of telling her. How many marriages get in trouble with a husband who loves their wife like this? Earl, can you think of any?
No, other than like she makes some choices to really depart from Christ. Deliberate disobedience. But even in that, the husband's love still pursues her. Gives her grace and forgiveness.
The only one I can think of, the wife was an unbeliever, was a professed unbeliever. And she didn't like it. She resented that her husband was a believer. And so she was unfaithful and was a drunkard. They eventually got divorced. And he was trying. He was really trying. So that's the only one I can think of. But obviously her heart was not turned toward the Lord. So I don't think I've ever seen a husband working hard with a Christian wife to love her and her not respond. I'm sure it could happen, but I haven't seen it. Anybody else seen that? It's a pretty good sample size, if none of us have seen that. We all know a lot of people, collectively. So, Gomer. Yeah. Okay, so there's biblical examples. That's probably a good one. Hosea and Gomer. Yeah. Of course, how would you like to be an eternal metaphor? I mean, that dude, he lost that one from the get-go. But he has a special place in heaven, I think. So practically all of these things, cause us to work through the fact that there should be verbal affirmation and thanks and praise and gratitude. Guys making time for her, communicating with her, listening to her, sharing life together. We talked about yesterday. All of those things should be part of the practical living out of this. And how does that happen effectively? Well, here's the second big responsibility of husbands. They should be a learner. So Mac deals with this as kind of a subset of being a lover, but I like it. I deal with husbands with it separately because I think it helps them think through how to learn to be more effective in their love. So it says, likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs together with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. This idea of dwell or live with your wives in an understanding way. Dwell with your wives according to knowledge, I think one of the other translations say, and that's a very literal translation, according to knowledge. And so that text tells husbands that they should be learning and understanding and knowing their wives so that they can live with them effectively and in a way that honors God and honors her. And it's a command to learn who your wife is, what she likes, what she dislikes, what she wants, what she desires, what pleases her, and it's a command you can't squirm out of it, guys. This is what it is. So we need to make it our task to know her. And that's, our culture says, well, I will never understand women, right? That's kind of the thing. Well, that's all right. You don't have to understand all women. Just one. Just one, right? Just one. So you can understand one. And it takes time. We know a lot of things about things that really don't matter. Ask me about the roster for the Detroit Lions during the off season. I can probably tell you more than any human being would want to know. So if we can study things about stupid stuff, our hobbies, computer software, sports teams, right? We can study stuff about our wives and take time from the other things if we have to. And it takes effort. So you can say, well, what do you mean study my wife? What do you mean get to know my wife? How do I study my wife? Well, it takes effort. That's what I'm saying there. And you can start with simple stuff. We were talking last night about the 50 questions, which is one of the handouts in your notes. And just going out and asking your wife simple questions about what they like, what they don't like. You're never done with that, by the way, because anybody here owned your home more than 10 years? Guys, have any of you painted the same room more than once? Anybody? No? That's just my wife then.
Sorry.
She paints it herself. Okay. Man, I'm feeling used. Yeah, so we owned our home for 12 years. I painted one room 3 times while we were there. So, and one time I textured it. So, I'm glad she didn't say, I don't like the texture anymore. Can you get rid of the texture? No. Yeah, her tastes change, right? So when we got married, she liked gold rings. Now she likes silver jewelry. She doesn't like gold jewelry. So I need to know those things, right? Because the last thing I want to do is go buy her a gift and think I'm all sweet and have her say, no, I don't like that. So, did I tell a story about my daughter and her end tables? No. So, my daughter was talking to my wife this week, and I've told this story a couple times, and it's just so funny. She said, I went down to the basement the other day. She's a newlywed, year and a half. She's been married. And Keith was building something. I don't know what it was. And I thought, I wonder what that is. Must be he's going to add something to it because it doesn't look like it's finished. Some old barn boards, and I don't know. She came home about a week later, and he's got these barn boards on a little pedestal thing, and he's screwing them into the living room floor. Boom, boom. She's like, what are you doing? He says, I made you some end tables. She's like, those are hideous. Well, and they didn't even stand up straight. That's why he's drilling them into the floor. So not only was he going to put these ugly little tables in their living room, but he couldn't move them around either. You couldn't even hide them. So guys, if you're going to build your wife something, get some design tips. First, right? Know what she likes. Know what she likes. It's important, and it takes effort to do that. So, and that expresses your care for her, right? So if it's important to her, if she likes it, then it just needs to be important to you. And there is no end to this. So Stuart Scott, who wrote the book, The Exemplary Husband, he was the guy that taught me biblical counseling the first time. He actually brought it to class. He had a 3-ring binder, just like this one, and on the front it said, Understanding Zandra. That was his wife's name, Isra's wife's name. Understanding Zandra. Want to live with his wife in an understanding way. That book was full of information about his wife. It had her dress sizes, all her clothing sizes, her ring size, her shoe size. So if he ever wanted to buy her something, he knew what size to get. I got to be honest, I probably wouldn't know. And but it had all kinds of stuff, her favorite restaurant, her favorite desserts, her favorite colors. And there's a lot of things in there crossed off and added because tastes change, right? So he just made it his job, really, to keep track of that. Their joke was that if he ever died, she'd just give the book to the next guy. And he'd just pick up where he left off. So it sounds funny until it happens, probably. But what you're doing when you're being intentional and careful and diligent about getting to know your wife and what she likes and dislikes, what she needs, what she doesn't need, what she values in your relationship and in your home, right? You are showing your care for her. And so that's what Peter says, show honor to her, right? Her opinions, her desires should be weighty to you. That's the idea. And that's how you communicate to her that she is precious and prized in your sight. And that is what I think we are being told there. Show her honor as the weaker vessel. That just means treating her with care. There's different interpretations of that passage. I don't want to get into the details, but I would typically explain that as weaker vessel means something more akin to a precious vase is the idea, rather than someone who's weaker physically or weaker emotionally. Some people take that view, but I see it as more of what you prize and value. And either way, I think that's the intention. So all of these things, when we are loving our wives like that, being careful and intentional and prizing her and her desires, when we're not doing that, Peter says it's going to affect our spiritual lives, right? Part of the motivation for this is so that your prayers may not be hindered. You're going to get along a lot better if you're really expressing that kind of care and that kind of desire to know your wife. And that's going to affect your spiritual lives as well. So first and foremost for the glory of God, but also so your prayers aren't hindered. You need to be a learner. So part of what you would give as a homework assignment is something like that, 50 questions to ask your wife sheet. Send him home. Say, get to know your wife better. Or many things like that. Third, husband needs to be a leader. Any questions about that before we hit the last one?
Encourage
Yeah.
You don't need to do that.
I've never seen anybody else do it. I've never felt compelled to do it myself. But what I will do is if we're out shopping or something, I'll use this booger. And I'll either take pictures of things when she's not looking, or I'll just open up one of those little notes. You know, you have to type in notes. And so I've got a note in there of stuff Michelle wants. Because I'm just a dork and I'll forget. Spent the first half of my marriage asking 11-year-old kids, do you remember where that sweater was that your mom said she wanted? I don't either. So, you know, after 10 or 12 years of that, I'm like, this is so dumb. Why don't I just write it down? So I keep a little note of things that she's told me that she wants. And that's really bottom level, I think, just keeping notes like that. Good place to start, though. All right. Oh.
These questions would be, I guess, good for wives as well. I know you're going to be talking about the role of the wife, the husband. But in our culture, I have found a lot of young women who don't really understand some of these same tactics or some of these same aspects of love towards their husband. And dealing with a lot of young women, I'm having to teach them how to love their husbands almost in very similar patterns. Do you ever address that where you can see the husband doing it, but the wife is just very egocentric?
I think, I don't know if I can remember addressing it specifically, like, you, ma'am, need to listen up about this too. My general experience is that if you get the husband functioning that way, that the wife kind of follows suit. That's much more natural to a woman. If they're being loved, they'll kind of love reciprocally in return. That's been my experience, and they get it. It's more intuitive for them, I think. In part, I think that's because God's created us to have different roles, and it's more intuitive for them to be kind of in that helping, serving mode, and so I think it's just more natural for them. But they usually get it. I don't think I've ever. That's why I think actually that it says husbands love and husbands learn, because that's where we're the weakest, and we're said that we are leaders, that we are the head of the house, but I'm not sure if it actually commands you to lead in a direct way like that. So it just seems like where we're weakest, God gives us direction. So wives, see to it that you respect your husband. I think that's the hardest part, because you're supposed to follow a sinner, right? And one of the hardest parts about being a wife, I think, is respecting a sinner. And so that's where the imperative piece comes at us. So it seems like the one that's the toughest to fulfill is the one where we get the imperative. So does that make sense? All right, leader. Husbands to be a leader. 1 Corinthians 11:3. I want you to understand the head of every man is Christ. The head of a wife is her husband, and the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. So it's clearly stated that husbands are the head in their home. That is leadership. There are some kind of popular views out there that headship means something other than leadership, but those are sort of culturally twisted interpretations of the text. Leadership in the home is not a dictatorship. First, you need to understand that. Matthew 20, 25 through 28 is Jesus. That's where it says, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, to give his life a ransom for many. I'm almost sure that's what that passage is. I didn't write it out in my notes. Is that it, Earl? Did I get that right? Yeah. So he says in verse 25, Jesus called the disciples to himself. He said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them. It's not this way among you. Whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant. Whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. So he draws that contrast, really, between a dictatorial, authoritarian type of leadership and the kind of leadership that is appropriate for Christians, and particularly applying it then to Christian husbands. So, are you leading in a selfish way for what you can get out of it, or in a selfless way for what you can give, right? So, we still have to love as we lead. So, whatever our leadership looks like, it still has to be sacrificial and in the best interests of our wife. That's what our leadership should be like. So, your time should prove that your leadership is in the best interest of your wife and your family. It should prove that. There have certainly been decisions that we've made in our life where my wife didn't feel like I was looking out for her best interests. Some of those were screw-ups, but most of the time, she's come back and said, I'm glad you made that choice. Some of them are financial. So, and, you know, to keep us not in a tough spot in life or a tough spot financially, making tough decisions where she would have preferred we do something else. So, over time, that should bear itself out. That your choices, especially the ones where you have to make tough choices that she doesn't necessarily disagree with, time should show that you're really making those choices for the best interest of your home and family. When you mess up, her response we'll talk about next hour. So, because you will. So we're not demanding submission from our wives. That's not, to say that you're the leader does not mean that you get to demand submission from your wife. That's not leading either. Again, your responsibilities are complementary, but how you work that out practically needs to be done with love. Leadership also doesn't mean you're making all the decisions by yourself, and you are a team leader, right? You're one flesh. You're sharing all of life together. You're sharing dreams and goals and desires with each other. And so you're not making all the decisions. Your wife is your best counselor. Your wife knows you and your home and everything else better than anyone else. So you're more of a team leader at that point, but still leading, right? But with all the resources and knowledge and desires of everyone coming together, you and your wife particularly. So making all the decisions or being in charge of everything too, there's a lot of reliance and delegation. If your wife is called by God to be your helper, suitable for you and fit for you, then there are just strengths and weaknesses, and that's different in every family. So people want to go, the husband should run the finances. Well, not some husbands, I can tell you that. So those are flexible issues, like who's in charge of what, you know. So leadership doesn't mean you're having to do everything. There's a lot of reliance and delegation, and that's part of the co-laboring together and really serving and living life together. So what is leadership all about? Following Christ's example first and foremost. Leadership is about serving. Jesus couldn't have been any more clear than he was there in Matthew 20, that leadership is about serving. Christ's example of what it looks like to lead, he's the good shepherd, right? He's the good shepherd. He's not the good cowboy. Okay? So there's a difference between how a shepherd leads and how authoritarian people lead, or rough and tumble people lead. So Philippians 2, 5 through 8, right? Jesus didn't even consider equality with God a thing to be clutched onto, right? Instead, he laid that aside and came to us in the likeness of sinful flesh, and has led, in a sense, sacrificially. He considered others more important than himself. right? And so we need to be thinking that way. That's what we're doing. We're following his example. We're considering others more important than ourselves, not even counting what is most precious about our identity, in his case, equality with God, something to be clutched onto. So lay your pride aside, guys, and love and serve and sacrifice. Practically, what does that look like? Focusing on your family's needs, understanding them and focusing on them, not neglecting them. Being goal-oriented, Ephesians 5 says we're to sanctify her and lead her someplace, and that's Christ's likeness. That's true of her. And Ephesians 6:4 with your children, that you're bringing them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. So you're working towards some goals if you're being a leader in a practical way. Next, being an example. Philippians 4:9, that's where Paul says to the church there, imitate me. You saw how I've lived and responded. I don't remember what that Jeremiah passage is. Now I want to look it up. Most of the time I have these read in my notes. That one I don't. Jeremiah 35 says, Then I set before the men of the house of the Rechabites pitchers full of wine and cups, and I said, Drink wine. But they said, We will not drink wine. For Jonadab, the son of Rechab, our father, commanded us, saying, You shall not drink wine, you or your sons forever. The issue there isn't whether it was right or wrong, but that there was a guy who was leading, and he set an example, and his leadership was of such character that everyone wanted to follow his leadership, follow his example, right? So they should respect the example of self-control, of good priorities, of showing love and serving, and all those things, and recognizing that even in things that are questionable, that we are working toward good and helpful ends. Ephesians 4:29, be solution-oriented. So that's speaking words that are fitting, that meet the need of the moment. And so as we're leading practically, we're helping solve problems. Being a teacher, being a manager in our homes, important. How about this one? Being pleasant to live with. Is your wife and kids, are they happy when you come home? They should be. Proverbs 5:18 says, Let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth. So there should be joy in your home, and especially when you're there. Spiritual leadership, last. The last page? Yeah, spiritual leadership. So that's Ephesians 6:4, bringing your children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Deuteronomy 6, teaching them diligently when you sit down, when you rise up, when you walk on the way. And Hebrews 10 says, don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together. So being a spiritual leader, getting your wife and children to the assembly of believers. Why? So that we can stir one another up to love and good deeds. This is where people learn of God and are built up and encouraged in God. So that's where we need to get them. Quick questions before I give you a little scenario to think about.
I know with being goals oriented, I'm sort of the guy who looks at some out in the future and everything else. I haven't small red yet. We're good. When we're trying to talk to somebody about the goal oriented thing, would it be more in line with saying having a long-term plan that everybody can jump in and follow? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so what are we talking about being goal-oriented? Having a long-term plan. I think those passages there speak more of having spiritual goals for your family. So, because it's talking about sanctifying and washing your wife by the water of the word like Christ, as he loved the church, and bringing your children up. So I'm thinking primarily about spiritual goals there. I mentioned how we would sit down and kind of do inventory of our children once a year, and where are their weaknesses, what should we help them think through and work on the next year. So that's kind of what I mean by that. I'm thinking more spiritual goals, but there are other things like career goals and long-term goals of whatever, retirement or that kind of stuff that also need to be thought through together.
I think of how do we as men protect our families, care for our families, so we try to anticipate things. None of us are guaranteed that we're going to live past the name. So if we don't know for sure, are we protecting our wife and family for their future if we go before them? So I think of health insurance, life insurance, safety, wills, you have your will together. Those are some of those things where we don't have a guarantee for tomorrow. So what are we doing to care to protect for them? Those are some ideas. I guess another thought, obviously, I don't drive a car. But I would be thinking, is the car safe for her to drive? Is it dependable? Do I need to get it replaced? Those kinds of things. And again, it's more caregiving. Because she doesn't have to be worried about that kind of thing. She can get in the car, put the key in the ignition, it's going to be safe to go. Does that help?
Yeah.
Protection, caregiving, looking down the road. Like with our children, how do we anticipating what the children are going to be doing in 3 to 4 to 5 years in terms of future education and career, and I would think even both of our children are married now. How do I help our children stay pure for marriage? An example was when our daughter was going to SEC, I said to her, if anybody wants to get your phone number, here's the rule. They got to ask me first. And I'm not sure she liked that initially, but later on she said, "Dad, that was so helpful." I haven't had one guy call me in all those years. And she's protected by that. Good question.
So let me give you a scenario. A couple comes to you, the wife says, I've had it. I'm kicking him out. He's not welcome in the house anymore. This has been going on for years and years. And they just start spilling the beans. So he is a guy who is very diligent about his spiritual disciplines. He was up every day at 5:30 reading his Bible and praying. His life did not match up with that during the week. This is the same guy I mentioned who would walk by the gym. So, okay, it's the same guy. So that was somewhat what he was like. He had kind of a wandering eye, if you will. That's a nice way of saying it. A lustful heart. But he was very selfish. He would come home from work every day with a six-pack, and he would go down in the basement, and he would drain that six-pack until he was edgy enough to come up and yell at his wife and kids. But they were in church every Sunday, and you would never have known any of this was going on. But in fact, it had been going on for a long, long time, 15 years. And she basically said, I can't handle his hypocrisy anymore. He just kind of lives his own life. He hides himself in the basement. He criticizes me all the time for things. Some things would have been worthy of criticism, perhaps, choices that she was making in her own life, but waiting until that 6th bottle of Bud was gone was not the time to bring that up. And that was the pattern. Day in and day out, she said, I'm tired of it. He's gotten counseling numerous times, different places. He's never changed. He's always the same. and I don't want him in the house anymore. She kicks him out. We met together a couple times, but she said, this is going nowhere, and he's not going to change. And so I'm not wanting to work on my marriage. This was her problem, right? I don't want to live with that man. So as long as he's like that, I don't want to live with him anymore. Okay, so she obviously had some issues that need to be dealt with too, but she refused to meet with me. He was willing. What do you teach him? All right, so now I want you to interpret. That's all the data you're going to get. I want you to interpret some of the problems, right? What would you teach him from the scriptures? And what kind of homework assignments would you begin to give him? So that's either things to learn, memorize, but also things to do. So we've talked about what his responsibilities are as a husband. How would you encourage him in that situation to begin to fulfill those responsibilities to learn and love and lead? Okay? Because that's where we were. This is where counseling goes. It's not easy. We're not sending them home to work to make an already happy marriage better. The ones you're counseling are like this, right? He's kicked out, but he still has to love and learn and lead his wife. So go. You got 10 minutes. I'll stop you after about 7 minutes, and we'll have a few minutes to interact a little bit. So just, at the table, or a couple tables together, because he was not in the home at that point.